Today, we're sitting down with Scott Drake, the founder and CEO of JumpCoach, where they help grow leaders that help grow organizations. In this conversation, we talk about the competency war that sometimes exists when you, as an employee, sometimes become the leader of a group of employees, and how you now need to change your decision-making to focus on executive-level decisions. We also talk in this conversation about the research project and shortcuts of leadership that Scott and his team at JumpCoach has come up with, including the 4 goals of leadership and the 9 jobs of a leader. We hope you enjoy this episode with Scott Drake. Scott, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Love to hear more about JumpCoach and how you help organizations grow their leaders so they can grow in turn as an organization. Can you give us a little bit about JumpCoach? What is JumpCoach specifically?
Yeah, so JumpCoach is a leadership training. I consider it a training and consulting company. I started it because, as I came up the ranks of leadership, I made all the mistakes there are to make. It felt like, and it took me about 10 years to really level up. And as an executive at a growing company, kind of what I noticed was where the leaders behind me were making all the same mistakes that I had made, right? Mm-hmm. And it took me, I joked, it took me about 10 years to really become a great leader. And I didn't have 10 years to watch them wreck my teams. So I had to come up with a shortcut. I had to come up with a faster way to really help them transition from being that great expert role player to actually leading to being a leader that can work through other people. So yeah, JumpCoach kind of came about to solve that problem. And it came about after a research project to really find ways to shortcut that learning curve for leaders and then help teams of leaders work better together. Because that was the other kind of challenge that I had as well. So those are the areas that we tend to focus.
Gotcha. Well, I'm very intrigued by this because certainly I don't want to speak for Rich specifically, but we've all made a lot of mistakes in leadership and growing, and we try and take those learnings and implement them. And I definitely in a few minutes I want to get to what this research project was. That seems very detailed, but I know a lot of businesses that the founder starts their business, they start growing their business, and at some stage they really have a hard time building that middle management level that can kind of do what they used to do when they first started their company to the same level they expected it. So I can't wait to learn more about that. Before you started JumpCoach, give us a little bit of your history in terms of how did this come to be, and what were those 10 years when you were making these mistakes before you started your training consulting business? What were examples of those mistakes?
Yeah, so I came out of a tech background. My background is a computer programmer. So I was one of those functional experts turned leader. And just because you're the best or the most senior salesperson or accountant or computer programmer rarely makes you a good leader. But yeah, so I was, an accomplished computer programmer. I'd spent some time at Microsoft, spent some time in Silicon Valley with some startups. And when it came time to coach problem solving, or when they would bring me problems and I could see solutions, then often, I would try to solve their problems for them instead of working through them, right? So I made a ton of mistakes in that regard. So most of the problems I had were, in that area in hiring, right? Always trying to hire for people who are experts instead of actually hiring people who would enjoy the work and do the work well were some of the things. So yeah, so I kind of came up through the ranks in tech. Ran a dev shop for about 7 years. Ended up just before JumpCoach, I was an executive at a medical education company. So I spent about 5 years working with how do we better educate the world's medical doctors. So I kind of took some of that learning and said, how do we better educate the next generation of leaders? So just kind of a long and winding path through tech is how I kind of ended up where I am today.
Gotcha. And so Scott, seen this before, right? You're the best salesperson, so let's make you the sales manager. Mm-hmm. You're a really good athlete, let's make you a coach. Here you have a computer programmer, like, hey, you're one of our best computer programmers. Why don't you be a leader of other computer programmers? Talk to us, like, when that first happened, when you moved from actually being a specialist to a leader of others that were specialists. What was the biggest learning curve you had in that process?
What I can see, it took me many years to really see it. Right. And what I see when I work with other people in that situation, number one, it's a very well studied transition. It's just very buried in wonky journals and academic stuff. And it's hard to get it out into the real world where people can see it.
Yeah.
But what happens, and what happened to me is my ego was very much attached to being that expert of a computer programmer.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that that's how I add value. And until I detached my ego from adding value through my old way, and attached my ego to adding value through being a leader, which I didn't even understand what that meant, then I struggled, right? So for me, I had been rewarded my whole life for getting A's and for being, the MVP on the team and for all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, when you become a leader, that's not what you should be rewarded for. That's not what's going to make you successful. So that's really where most young leaders trip up, and that's where I tripped up as I made that transition.
Hmm. Interesting, the transition between you being the MVP on the team to your job becomes creating MVPs on the team. And it's very different being the MVP versus creating the MVP. Can you speak to how did your ego more specifically get in the way? I think we all can relate with the idea of ego. We all understand at some level like what ego is, but what was your experience about how ego got in the way of the transition from being an MVP to creating MVPs?
Yeah. So think about again, one of the common beliefs is who is the boss? The boss is the best or the most senior. So my goal in my head emotionally, and this is why emotional intelligence is important. Intellectually, I could understand this, but emotionally, I couldn't force myself to behave in the right way. But it was that if the best is the leader, then I better show that I'm the best, right? I better close the sales that are impossible to close. I better solve that tough technical problem that nobody else can solve. I better jump in and prove to my team that I'm the best, right? But what happens is what I see a lot is I call that a competency war at that point, where the leader is trying to prove that they're the best. The team is also trying to earn the respect and trust of their boss by proving that they're competent. Right. So what I ended up doing, and what a lot of leaders do, is we feel like we've got to be the best and we've got to prove that we're the best. And that just ends up with contention between manager and team instead of collaboration. So it really is, you have to detach your ego from saying, it's not my job to be the best anymore. Right. It is now my job to make them the best. Let them be the heroes of the story. I have a whole new story I get to go be the hero of. And but you have to be, it's not a natural transition. Somebody has to coach you through it, or you have to stumble across the right things, which aren't very easy to trip over, right? And it's often a very long process for many people. It can happen really fast when somebody points it out, but until somebody points it out, it's completely counterintuitive to everything that you've experienced your entire career.
And from many entrepreneurs I've spoken with, their fear when you get into the real nitty gritty of the conversation about shining so much light on their people is that their concern is their people may then ultimately hold them hostage and say, well, since I'm so important to your business, you owe me a raise, or why can't I get a couple of more percent? And there's this release of control of that aspect of the business. Can you speak to that? And how does a leader through JumpCoach grapple with that feeling of to shine so much light on my people and for me to not be the best is actually a liability, not an asset, is kind of the starting position. How do you get them over that hurdle?
So I get them over the hurdle by saying, what is it preventing you from doing? Right? If you are intent on staying in the weeds and not giving control to your team, what are you not doing that's going to move your business forward because you can't? Right? And here's an example. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a coaching call with the COO, and he was really just kind of struggling with. He would see his team firefighting, and he would want to jump in and help them. And he felt like, number one, he was doing a disservice to his team if he wouldn't just jump in and help them. Right. He felt like that's where he needed to be. So that was part of his rationale, was that he just wanted to be helpful to his team. Right. But at the same time, where I kind of repointed him is to say, why is your team constantly firefighting? What structural problem in your business exists that causes your team to constantly have to go into this mode? Go fix that problem. Right. That's the executive level problem to go solve. So to me, when I see people that want to stay in the weeds for whatever reason, it's often there are other things that they need to be focused on that are being ignored. So that's where I try to point them, is I try to say, go focus there, because that's really where you create value today. You're out to solve $1 million problems, $100,000 problems, not these $10,000 problems stuck in the weed that you really need to be able to hand off to other people. And if you can't do that, then you're going to struggle as that executive level leader.
Gosh, the word you use, it's an executive level problem, really resonated for me.
Yeah, me too.
How do you know if it's an executive level problem or not? Are there criteria? Is it just a feel? Is it, how would you define an executive level problem so that leaders know that's an executive level problem? That's not.
So yeah, typically it's going to vary, right? There's no perfect right answer for it, but I tend to try to break things down into the whys, the whats, and the hows, right? So why do we exist? Why does our organization exist? Right? What are our goals in the world? How do we hope to have an impact in the world? Right? And then how do we actually execute on that strategy? So low level frontline leaders are often focused on the hows, right? How do we do things? And the high level leaders need to be comfortable with letting them focus on the hows, right? Mid-level leaders tend to focus on the what's in the house, right? They're kind of focused on we're being pointed in this direction. We have to get these things done. They're thinking more, 3 to 12 month time horizons. Frontlines are more 3 month time horizons. The executive level stuff is really that whys and the what's, right? Why do we exist? What's our 6 month strategy? What's our 1 year strategy? What are the things that need to be put in place? What are some of the bigger partnerships? What are some of the bigger resource needs that we have in this organization? What does our financing look like, right? Those are the types of things that are often being dealt with at an executive level that need to be dealt with. And if they're not, then they often cause a lot of those problems into lower levels. So to me, there's no perfect answer. Again, I think size of the company is going to have a big impact. If you have one level of management, the executive is basically, you're a founder and you've got 10 people and you've got a couple other managers helping you, then you're going to deal with all those layers. But as you start putting in more layers of management, then as the executives, you need to step up and create that space for the teams below you to actually contribute and let them own those things and let them get the wins for those things, right? That's typically, I think, where the decision criteria comes in.
Scott, that is brilliant. I want to validate it just by reciting it back to you to make sure I got it, but I love it. You've got the why, which is around why do you exist and why are you doing something. You've got the what, which is you said about the impact and the strategy. And then the how is the execution of it. And you said lower level leadership is focused on the how, and that's 3 months or less. Mid-level leadership is focused on the what, the strategy and looking at the impact. And higher level leadership is looking at, 12 months plus on the whys are things happening. Did I get that right?
Yeah, generally so. I think you have to an organization has to focus on all three of those levels. And the more leaders you bring in, the more you can distribute that across that. Right. So that's absolutely right.
Yeah, it seems like, Rich, I can't remember what the name of the book was. You certainly will. But it almost seems to me the way to find that executive problem is to ask a lot of whys, the 5 whys, right? Oh, we just lost a customer. Why? Because we didn't perform right. Well, why? And you just keep going, why? Well, the answer to the why at the end of the day, maybe that executive level problem that you have nobody focused on the why do you exist or the strategy or whatever level it may be. That did resonate with me as well. That executive level problem and how to find it. And I love the deeper dive questions that really the leader of the organization or the leader of the people, you really need to stay at that level. And Scott, I'll share with you a quick story for me that taught me this lesson, because I was definitely a get in the trenches and do it with the team type of leader, maybe to a fault for quite a bit of my leadership career. And I was put in a position in the mid around 2012, 2013, where I was an executive of a company in an industry I knew nothing about. And for the first time, I actually couldn't do the work. All I could do was rely on my leadership skills. And it turned in, and one of the core values of that company was being a servant leader. And it taught me how to be a servant leader to others without actually knowing what they're doing. So I couldn't actually help them tactically with the engineering problem or the logistics problem because I didn't know how to solve that problem. And it forced me to be that leader to them of, okay, well, why is this a problem? What do I need to do to help you unplug this gap so we can actually go through the wall here or whatever it may be? That was a huge learning for me. How many times do you see that as a catalyst to really identifying the leadership skill versus the expert becoming the boss?
I think it's pretty common. I mean, in my last job, I forced myself to step out. I said, I again, I said, I'm going to get a Mac computer, which I don't have any of my coding stuff on. I don't have any programming stuff on. I can't get into the team's work at all with the way this computer is set up, right? I want to force myself to, because I was given a choice. You can stay hands-on or you can come out and just be purely executive, right? So
Yep.
I did something similar, and I said, but I forced myself into that role to say, I do not even have access to their work, to their code. I have to trust them. I have to learn to work to them. Because what I found is that the tech had gotten so diverse and so different in different areas and so many different domains that it's like no one person could really keep up with it all.
Yeah.
So the idea that you have to is going to do that. So yeah, it's very, very common. And people, I describe leadership as a choice, right? You're choosing to lead. Like leadership is working through others to get things done. You're choosing to work through other people instead of doing it yourself. And it's as simple as making that choice, but you have to make that choice. And yeah, so when I get hold of a salesperson or an accountant who's now the COO, it is simply a choice that you have to choose to step back and let other people do that. And it's not easy for them, right? Again, that's why emotional intelligence is so important, is their emotions pull them into want to do this, right? Intellectually, they understand that they shouldn't, but their emotions pull them in and want to be helpful or for what other reason. And they have to be able to say, I'm not going to act on that. I have to step back, slow down, and not act on that.
I love that. So, in my situation, I was put into the situation where I knew nothing about the expertise of this business. I had to focus on my leadership skills. I think what you're saying, and it's fantastic. I have an individual I'm coaching right now that's kind of in this situation. Is it's almost like you have to forget everything you know about the expertise of this business and just focus entirely on your leadership capabilities, because that's a choice you need to make, is to be a leader, not a doer in this particular environment. And the second piece that I loved of what you talked about, which I think entrepreneurs have a really, 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 really hard time with, especially the smaller their business, the harder it is to allow their people to fail. Be okay with them handling it themselves and it not necessarily working the exact same way as if you had done it yourself, and allow them to learn from that process. Is that something that you work a lot with your people as well? Because that's difficult. It's very scary to say, I'm going to allow them to do that. We may lose a customer because of it, or we may, do something that could be temporarily or short-term damaging to the business because I wasn't involved and I didn't make sure it was done right from a micromanagement perspective. Is that something that you feel like leaders struggle with?
It goes back to, again, you're rewarded your whole life for having answers, and you think that
Yeah.
your way of doing things is the right way, and that's part of why you're promoted, and that's part of why you're in that responsibility. And it really does come down to saying, there's a lot of different ways to solve this problem. I try to help people get really clear on making sure their team is aware of the actual problem they're trying to solve and the trade-offs. Like here are we could solve this problem 3 or 4 different ways. Here are the trade-offs. Here's the cost factors. Here's the risk factor. Here's time factors. Here are the things that whatever solution you come up with is going to be judged as successful on these things. If you can hit that, then I'm going to trust your solution a lot more. So really, where I try to get leaders to go is to say, you've got to be much clearer when you delegate on your coaching problem solving around the problem and the success criteria than you do on the actual chosen means of implementing a solution to that problem.
Scott, when you were talking about leadership, you had talked about it's a choice. It's a decision that's made, and it's working through others to get things done. And then you dropped a word or 2 words there in emotional intelligence. And can you expand on that, on what is emotional intelligence as how you see it, and the factor that plays in leadership?
Yes. So emotional intelligence is your brain processes every stimulus in 2 ways. All right. Emotionally and rationally. And your emotional brain gets everything first, just in case you're being chased by a bear. Right. So every stimulus at home, at work, wherever you are, every sense that you're bringing into your body goes through an emotional filter before it goes through a rational filter. And emotional intelligence is recognizing when that emotional filter gets things wired up and frenzied in a way that it shouldn't, and giving your rational brain time to kick in so that you can respond better instead of reacting, right? So it's really important for leaders to be able to say, I recognize that these stimulus are going to come in, and there's a situation where I may feel like my status is threatened. I may feel like somebody with a great solution is going to make me not look as smart or as good. And I'm going to have that emotional reaction, right? I'm going to have it. I can't turn it off, but I'm going to rationally recognize that and say, I'm not going to act on it. Right. So it is the single most important thing for leaders, because there's so many things that are going to challenge your emotional sense of self and sense of well-being and the safety of your company and all these kinds of things. And you have to learn that you're going to have those emotional reactions first, but you've got to give yourself that space to respond thoughtfully instead. That to me is emotional intelligence and why it's important for leaders.
Are people born with it, or can they develop it?
It's absolutely something you can develop. I think some people are obviously just more emotional. Some people, I think that, I'm a very rational personality type. So it comes a lot easier for me, but it is something that people can get better at. It's one of the first things we try to get people to doing is journaling and just paying attention to the types of situations as a leader that can cause these emotional reactions. And to start just paying attention to them, and then pay attention to how are you responding in those moments, and then how can you respond better, right? So that's actually one of the very first things we try to work with people on, is to get them to start recognizing some of those situations.
That's great. I was just going to ask you, how do you recommend people develop emotional intelligence? You said the very first thing that you have them working on is journaling. What is their emotion? What else do you do? So for our entrepreneur listeners that are going, yep, emotional intelligence, heard about it, don't know a ton about it. What can I do though, Scott? Like today, this week, I want to get better on emotional intelligence. How?
Yeah. So there's what we call them moments that matter. 3 situations where emotional intelligence is super important for leaders, right? One of them is as you delegate. Are you delegating problems, or are you delegating tasks? The second is when somebody brings you a problem and says, help me solve this problem, Scott, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. Help me figure out what to do, or tell me what to do, right? That's the second one, is how do you respond when somebody asks you for help? And then the third one is when somebody shares an idea. Hey, Scott, I see this problem that we've got, and here's a great idea on how I think we can solve it, right? And Scott, the leader, Scott's brain is wired to see every single problem with anybody else's ideas. Right. So we have to recognize that in that moment, we can't just state all the problems that we see. We have to respond with curiosity. Mm-hmm. So there's really those 3 areas of delegation, responding and problem solving, and then responding as somebody shares an idea, that if you pay attention to those 3 areas that happen over and over all day long in business, just pay attention to those. And we give them a 15, 20 question, just thought questions that they can kind of skim those every day. They don't have to answer them every day, but they can skim them every day, and it will trigger their thoughts on what were those situations today, and then how did I respond? Did I respond in ways that were actually healthy? Did I respond in ways that built the motivation of my team, that added clarity? Or did I behave in ways that maybe stomped on some people's toes, or that I caused people to doubt, or I caused these other things? So it's really paying attention to the day-to-day tiny little moments that happen as a leader, and working to get better in those, and recognizing how you feel and respond emotionally in those situations.
And are those some of the 3 questions? Did I respond in a healthy way with clarity that built the team?
Yeah. If you give me 2 seconds, I'll pull up the list and I'll actually.
Yeah, if you would.
Hang on a second.
And again, this is another example, John. We could cut this part out and just go to, I asked.
No, I think that's a horrible idea.
Yeah.
I'm the expert here, and I say we don't cut this out.
I just shared an idea with you, and you're criticizing me. You should have higher emotional intelligence. You can't use emotional intelligence as a weapon, though. You can't be like.
I will say, Rich, though, that's the one that I see the most often from what the 3 things, the 3 situations, is you're sitting in a room with peers, and the leader's in the room who's the expert as well, and somebody says, well, I think we should, redo our website, and the leader's like, no, that's a horrible idea, and the feeling that person has in the moment, and that emotional intelligence that leader lacked in that moment, is one that just is so destructive to the building of leaders that can grow the organization, right? Versus oh, Rich, you think we should change our website? Tell me more about that. Like, why do you think that's the case? You may still think in your head that's a horrible idea and why would we do this? But it's the words that come out of your mouth and how you react to that situation that shows your emotional intelligence. To the point Scott made is, instead of thinking emotionally, just think rationally, be curious, ask questions. You may still get to the same result, but it's how you deal with it. I'd love to hear more of these questions.
Yeah, I think leave all of that in. I think that was a great conversation and a great thing. So I say leave it in. My vote's for leave it in. But now here are the questions, right? The first set is, were there any moments that mattered that day, right? Did anybody ask you for help? Did you ask anybody for help? And were any ideas shared? And then how did it go? Just think about, how did it go? Where did the conversation start? How did it go? Did you want to jump in and help? And would that have been helpful, right? Did you want to jump in the middle of that situation and fight fires? And would that have actually been the right thing to do? And then also pay attention to, how did the teammates respond, right? Were any of the teammates, challenging or being curious, or how were they responding? So that's one set. The other is, were there any decisions made today, right? What decisions happened today? What role did you play in those decisions? What role did other people play in those decisions? Did you agree with the decision? Right? I mean, it's not all decisions are going to get made that we actually agree with. So how did you feel in that moment when you had to let a decision slide that you didn't necessarily agree with, right? Think about that. There's the idea of advocacy versus inquiry. There's the idea of asking questions versus stating my opinions about it, right? How much time did you spend in advocacy versus inquiry? That's another great way to think about how you're responding in those moments. And then also, again, think about how your teammates responded in those same situations around decisions. So that's a second big set. And then the third big set is around, were there any setbacks or mistakes? Did something fail today? Did a project not come together? Was there bad news delivered? Whatever, right? So how did you respond? Those are really often emotionally charged situations. So how quickly did your rational brain kick in? Or did you kind of act on emotions, right? Just think about it. Just look at those events that happened that day. And then, was your response really helpful? Would you have wanted your boss to respond in the way that you responded? Right? Some of those kinds of things. You really have to ask those hard questions. Did you want to be the hero? Did you want to jump in and be the hero of the story? And would that have been appropriate? Or was this a situation where you could let somebody else get the win, let somebody else, do great work and get great satisfaction from their work? Or did you just take that opportunity for yourself and in a way steal from your team? So it's really those three big areas, the moments that matter, decisions, and setbacks. And if you just pay attention to yourself for a few weeks on those types of questions, then you will recognize where you're doing well and where you may need to improve, and you can start to make improvements. And ultimately, it is truly just recognizing it and trying to catch yourself and letting yourself make better decisions.
So 3 areas are: were you asked for help? Did you ask for help? And ideas shared. And I'm picturing, and this may not be appropriate, but I'd love to put this in a framework that my mind thinks. I'm picturing like a matrix to go, okay, were you asked for help? Scott, what's the unhealthy response? Like, what's the one word? Like, most people do this if you're not emotionally intelligent. If your emotional intelligence is online, this is what you would do. And I'd love to go through all 3 if we could do that. I think on the ideas shared, you said curiosity is the approach.
Mm-hmm.
So on ideas shared, would the other end of it be like judgment versus curiosity?
Yep.
Okay. What about on asked for help? What would be the juxtaposition there on the unhealthy versus healthy?
So I would put that as advocacy versus inquiry.
Okay.
All right. So basically, you give them an answer. Right. You come to me and you say, Scott, I don't understand how to fix this part of a database. And you go, well, what I've seen in the past is typically these kind of problems. Why don't you just go do this? As opposed to inquiring and asking questions. So what you really need to do is say, I need to help them get unstuck using their brain, not mine. Right. So I need to ask enough questions to help them diagnose this. And we actually teach them a problem solving framework, a 6-step framework that they can in their own heads be going, okay, is this problem a step 1 or step 4? And then, so I need to change my questioning based on where they are. Like, is this question about the goal? Is this question about trade-offs? Is this question about ideas? Is this question about choosing an idea, implementation? Like, where are they in this question? And then based on that, I'm going to respond with curiosity, and I'm going to inquire more than I'm going to be an advocate. That's typically how I would describe that second piece.
Excellent. And then what about asking for help? What would be the juxtaposition there on the unhealthy versus the healthy?
Ideally, and it's going to vary a little bit based on the type of work. So if the work is more creative, you really want to challenge the team. You want to be the challenger and not the taskmaster, right? You want to give people problems to solve, not tasks to carry out. Now, sometimes with very mechanistic work, with very routine work, yeah, you just want them to carry out the task. We've already got systems built in place. Just follow the system. But more and more work of humans is that creative work where there isn't a system. This is the work that falls outside of the system. So ideally, you would give them a problem. You'd be the challenger instead of a taskmaster.
That is excellent. Thank you for that. Let's transition over into.
I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, I can tell you're just lighting up. For those that are listening, you should see the smile on Scott's face.
And Rich, before you move on there, I just wanted to make one quick comment, which can simplify a lot of this, and it's simplified it in my mind as well, right? And this is the old adage: treat people like you would like to be treated, right? If you sum all of that up, it's how would you feel if you were in a room, maybe a boardroom with your investors or whatever, and you said something and your investors treated you like that, or, just take yourself to their position, treat people the way you would like to be treated. It makes a big difference, right? When you just think that way, I really love that approach to it. And as well too, Scott, we just talked about regarding coaching, the best coaching calls I've ever had with a coach, so I'm the coachee with the coach, is when they spoke probably less than 20% of the time. And they just asked me thought-provoking questions. And at the end of the call, I was like, hey, thanks for just listening. I think I know what to do now. and if you could just repeat that with your team and speak less, ask provocative questions that will really get them thinking, you really, to your point, use their mind to solve the problems. They will feel empowered and learn from that process. Love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love that.
Excellent. Can you transition for us, Scott, over into your research? And, obviously we don't have time to get into all the painstaking details, but can you give us some headlines that came out of the research that inspire you?
Yeah. So I was trying to answer the question, how do you know you're doing a great job as a leader? Right. That's one of my favorite questions to go and ask people is, how do you know you're doing a great job as a leader? Like, where do you focus your energy day to day? What's important? And what I found was every leader had a different answer. And I saw a lot of head scratching, and a lot of people didn't really know, right? If you go, how do you know you're doing a great job as a salesperson? They can give you some thoughtful answers, or an accountant or a computer programmer can give you thoughtful answers, but leaders really didn't have good answers. So I started asking coaches, and I started asking other, trainers and people in that were professionally developing leaders, and they really didn't have good answers. So I said, okay, how do we answer this question? So I embarked on about a 5-year research project where I dug into the learning objectives of a bunch of MBA programs, a bunch of graduate level leadership programs, about several hundred leadership books. Some of them are popular books. I just kind of broke them down and said, what are they actually trying to teach you? And then if we map all this stuff together, where does it distill down to answer that question, how do you know you're doing a great job? And it really came down to there's 4 goals of leadership, 4 big overarching goals of leadership. And then there's 9 jobs, 9 activities, 9 areas you need to focus your energy. And, the goals are, getting results with an engaged team for enthusiastic customers while creating more leaders. And the takeaway is that those 4 goals are sometimes conflicting, and that different teams and different organizations will balance them differently. So you bring in a manager.
Real quick, you got results, engaged team. What were the other 2?
Enthusiastic customers.
Yep.
And creating more leaders, which is kind of replacing yourself, right? You want to make yourself dispensable so that you can go on and do higher value things. So the challenge is that different teams will balance those in different ways. For example, one company I worked with that was basically a call center. A call center worker, it's a transitory job. It's not something that you're going to build a lot of engagement around. You can try, but you're just not going to make much progress there. So they're going to invest a lot more in results. Their customers are often very cutthroat, very much win-lose. It's not an industry of win-win, right? So they're going to balance that results versus engagement versus enthusiasm differently than, say, a consulting firm that I owned, right? It was all about, number one, my staff. I've got to keep them happy. So the engagement was really important. And customer enthusiasm, you were doing business with the people that you felt like, had your back and were in it. So we invested so much more on those 2 aspects, and we let results slide a little bit, right? So it's really about recognizing that a leader's job is to balance those 4 things, but different leaders would do it differently. And you hire somebody into your company and you don't set the expectation correctly, then that's where you're going to start to see problems with leader A is working toward one set of goals and leader B is working toward a different set of goals. And now all of a sudden we've got this conflict and this disconnection at the leadership level that's just going to bubble all the way down through the organization and cause problems. So that's one of the biggest takeaways from that is just recognizing that these are the goals. They have to be measurable in a way that's meaningful to our business, and that we have to balance them correctly for our business, and we have to be in agreement on all of that as a team of leaders.
And do you picture, you say balance, so do you picture you're not really able to have a 5 out of 5 on all 4? There has to be some give and take on where the focus of the leadership team is and ultimately the organization?
Yep, pretty much. Yeah. So it's very, I mean, I guess you could try to get to a 505, but I think it's going to be very hard. I think it's at a point in time, you're making decisions and you're having to, again, balance your trade-offs. Like I can do X, but you know what? That's going to cost us some profitability, but it's going to make this customer really happy. So I'm gonna make this decision. I'm gonna balance those things differently in this decision, right? We could do these things that we think are going to improve morale or employee engagement, right? But they're going to slow us down on this other area, right? So we're going to have to make these trade-offs. These are typically the areas where trade-offs happen. So I think it's very, very hard for any organization to get to a 505, and I don't think you really want to, right? I don't think that's necessarily the goal is to get to a 505. It's just the awareness of it and having the right goals around it.
And my guess is in those that you consult with and coach, that it's not about what you just said in getting to a 5 out of 5. It's about being intentional. Like, what are you prioritizing and what is the give and take to prioritizing that? And then is that in fact what you want to prioritize? So if you look at results as an example, if the priority is a 5 out of 5 on results, what will that negatively impact the engagement of a team, enthusiastic customers, or creating great leaders? And then can we go through them all and go, hey, if you focus on an engaged team, that may negatively impact results. It may negatively impact. Is that how it works, or is it more complex than that?
It's pretty complicated. I'll give you a couple examples that may help. Like one company I was working with, their existing product suite was dated and it was not going to be the future of the company, but they had to continue investing in it. They had to continue building on it for at least another probably 18 to 24 months to keep the company afloat, to keep the cash coming in so that they could be investing in the future stuff. So they had another set of projects, which were the future stuff, right? The stuff that's 18, 24 months out. And they were basically saying, we know we're going to burn our team out to do this, but we have to do it, right? We don't have a choice, right? The results side has to happen, or this company is just not going to exist in 4 years because we're going to get passed by the market. So they had to make that strategic decision to say, we're going to work our team harder. We don't want to go raise money and build a different team. We want to go this path, but but that's the choice that we're going to make. But now every other management decision we make has to cascade off that, right? We can't have disagreement amongst people because we're choosing to go down this path, right? Another example would be, there was one firm that they really wanted a large part of their job to give opportunities to people who normally wouldn't get them. So they were willing to take chances and hire people and train them. But what they found was that there was so much damage to results from doing that after 18 months, they had to pull back and stop, right? But having this framework now and this language to talk about it, what it did is it enabled the team to really understand, look, we had this idea and it was important, but it didn't work. And that's okay, right? It's okay. It's okay when those types of things happen. You have to, but you can readjust, realign, pivot, and move the business forward in a different direction that makes more sense and that actually works. But it gave them that framework to do it, right? So I think, I think you just kind of have, it's a language and a framework to think about the feelings that you're having, right? More than it's a set of levers that you switch and it just changes this lever, right? I don't think you can be quite that mechanical with it.
Yeah, and Scott, I think having a common language with the leadership team is so critical. It just creates so much more open conversation. Even having open conversation about the 3 situations we may be in as leaders. And one thing you said earlier in the conversation is the whole competency war.
Mhm.
And when you're in that competency war and everybody's trying to, hey, I have the best idea and I have this, it takes someone to point it out. And one of the problems I think with a leader is when you're the leader and everybody's in the room, the subordinates probably won't point out that you reacted emotionally or didn't really treat that person the way you would probably want to be treated. They probably won't do that. But if you do have open conversation about emotional intelligence and the three situations, and you have the vulnerability to tell your team, hey, if ever I do something like that, please call me out. Like, I don't want you to feel that way. It's really good. And you have these common goals that you're aligned to and everybody can talk to them. It's great. I heard you say there's 4 goals of a team, and then you said there's 9 something, and I missed what the 9 something was. What was that?
There's 9 jobs. 9 jobs are activities that leaders. So a lot of times leaders want to stay in the weeds because they don't know what their job is as a leader.
Okay.
So your job as a leader is to, number one, be a coach. Is to remove obstacles. It's to build relationships. It's to become a strategic learner. Be agile. Be open to learning and being agile. Create alignment. Challenge the team. Nurture a healthy culture. Assemble the right team. And then create accountability. And that's a lot there. So I'm more than happy to respond. But basically, those are the areas that managers need to focus. And if your managers aren't focused on those areas, or they don't understand the cultural goals, they don't understand the alignment and vision goals, they're not coaching in a similar way, then that's where, again, teams are going to sometimes struggle to work from the same playbook. So that's the other thing. So when I came up through the ranks, I didn't understand where I needed to focus my energy. So I've focused my energy in the wrong areas, right? Yeah. So what those 9 jobs help people do is say, this is where you focus your energy. Like, this is your job as a leader. And these are the areas you need to improve. And that's what we help people kind of figure out for themselves, is where they need
I love that. I love those 9 jobs. I didn't write them down fast enough. So can you give them to me one more time? I got 7 of the 9. So I'm pretty close.
I got 7
7
also.
of the 9.
All right, let's cross-reference, John. Did you get be a coach?
Yes, I got remove obstacles, number 2.
Build relationships.
Got it. Be agile.
Alignment.
Yeah, create alignment.
Missed alignment.
And
what's your next one?
Then I've got culture.
Build culture. Then I got build a right team.
Right team.
Yeah, so challenge the team was in there. So when you create a vision, then you need to communicate that vision to the team in a challenging way. That's challenge the team.
Challenge team. I missed that one.
6th one, yeah.
So did I. So it goes from alignment to challenge team, and then I've got culture.
Culture, nurture a healthy culture.
And then I think I missed one, and then accountability.
Build the right team.
Build the right team.
And then accountability.
And create accountability.
That's funny, John, because each of us missed challenge team, and then we filled in each other's gaps on the other team.
Yeah, love it. I mean, I understand now. When you originally said, did some research, came up with some shortcuts, I believe, at least for me, these 4 goals and 9 jobs are really the outcome of what you would call your shortcuts. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I start working with somebody, first thing we do is we go through the mindset shift. And I'm actually flipping it around a little bit. The second thing we do is a scorecard. So we actually took these 4 goals and 9 jobs and we created a scorecard.
Okay.
39 questions people can go through and rate themselves on and rate their organization on. And based on that,
and that's on your website also, the leadership assessment and scorecard.
Yeah.
And is that a free tool on your website?
Yeah. So it's a free tool on the website that'll actually explain what these are and then show them where their gaps are.
That's great. And the website, by the way, is JumpCoach.com.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm actually starting another crop on coaching where I'm actually starting with the scorecard first and then falling back into the mindset, because the be a coach part is really the mindset piece. But it's the hardest. It's the hardest one for people to get right because again, they've been rewarded their whole lives for being the experts. Yeah. So I'm starting with the scorecard with some, and then working backwards into the mindset, and then working forward into agility, which is kind of our third piece, which is the becoming a strategic learner. How do you grow over time? Becoming a great leader is you're not going to go to a workshop and do it once, right? It's a constant practice of improvement, and that's really where we help them do that as well.
Gotcha. So Scott, in terms of JumpCoach and what you do, you said training and consulting. So what I believe that means to me is you go and work with teams to talk about this common language, how they can all work together, and with the leader kind of at the front of the conversation, bringing you in to say, hey, I want us to all work together better, and let's have this common language. And then is it fair to say you also do coaching of leaders themselves that are learning the mindset and agility to kind of keep learning themselves? Is that kind of the two angles you take with JumpCoach?
Yeah, we take two angles. So we built what I call an accelerator program, which is essentially 3 lessons and 9 developmental assignments that are kind of meant to be done over 10 or 12 weeks. And it's actually a very low cost, self-paced training and development tool that was meant for, I've got a new leader starting and I'm going to run them through this program. And in 10 or 12 weeks, they're going to be doing their normal job, but they're going to be doing this again for a couple hours a week. And they're going to come out the other side of that with all of this stuff understood, right? And it's going to be a learning for it's going to still take them a little bit of time, but it solved that problem for me of I can't have these new leaders wreck my teams while they spend 5 years figuring out leadership. So that's a big piece of what we do, and was designed to be self-paced, but we also do coaching around that. So we can work with people for anywhere from 3 sessions to 10 sessions as they go through that process. But it's a set process that has a start and a finish, and is intended to bring them up to speed and really get them working well. And then the other side that we do is we take that scorecard and we help leadership teams understand it and assess themselves. And then it gives them kind of a playbook to work from. It's a lot of teams are kind of like basketball teams that don't know about defense or rebounding, right? They're just things that they're missing completely that they just don't know, right? And that's okay. That's just kind of what happens. And then you also see, think of a basketball team where all the coaches have different playbooks, right? There's no alignment between the teams. They all kind of go about a different way. So what that scorecard does is it helps them, number one, make sure that they're doing everything they should be doing, and that there's alignment amongst the leadership team to be doing things collectively. So that's really not a very long process. That's we have the assessment tool, and we can pull some reports off of that. And then we do a handful of sessions with them and with the team to get them just kind of thinking about things the right way, because we can't make the decisions for them. We can just point them in the right direction and challenge them with the right questions and let them put in the work and do the work and just kind of support them. So that's actually a pretty quick process. It doesn't take a ton of time. So those are 2 areas that we develop.
Yeah, thank you for that. As we look to close the conversation for today, and this has been excellent, by the way, thank you. I want to put you in a hypothetical situation. Let's say John and I on this podcast, we absolutely explode this thing. And you have the ear of all leaders, and what you say next is going to be translated into the correct language for all leaders. And you got one shot to say, hey, all leaders, attention, all leaders, Scott has a heads up for you. What would the heads up be? What would the message be that you would give all leaders if you had their ear?
More today with the challenges of business, we have to truly embrace building organizations that are around the team, around the people of the team. And I think that's where so much of the pressure of business historically has been on numbers and on profitability and on efficiency and on maximizing this and maximizing our return to investors, all this kind of stuff. But we're hitting a point where the labor market is becoming tighter than the capital market in some ways, and that we've really got to pay a lot more attention to what do people want out of their work, right? People don't show up so that Scott can make an extra 5% this year, right? People show up because there's something in it for them, right? There's something there that's intrinsically motivating beyond just the pay and the perks and the ping pong table, right? There's something, they get to solve a problem. They get to do interesting work. They get to work with a great team. They get to have a say in matters, right? There's something intrinsically motivating about what they're doing. And for a lot of leaders and a lot of leadership decisions aren't made with that in mind. And they pay the price, right? Ultimately, companies struggle because they don't have the talent they need to do the things they need to do. So I think if there's one thing that I think is going to impact more businesses in the next 10 or 20 years that hasn't been quite as important in the last 10 or 20 years, it's going to be really understanding what is intrinsically motivating to an employee and being able to deliver that. Because that's the only way you're going to get the talent that you need to really carry your organization forward. So I think that's the number one thing that I try to get people to get out of our work at JumpCoach.
Love that.
Powerful. Thank you for the conversation today, Scott. That was excellent, and look forward to connecting at some point in the future.
Rich, John, thanks so much. I really enjoyed this. This is a great conversation. I enjoyed it very much.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, I found Scott's blend of there are 3 moments that matter and 4 goals and 9 jobs. There was this blend of certainty about leadership with this just very genuine connecting way that he went about it. And I rarely find that blend. Sometimes people are way too much on that process orientation side, and they're like, they're the 3 this, the 8 this, the 7 this, the 6 this, and it's just kind of rattling off almost mechanically.
Yeah.
And then there are people that are like, they're smart, they're good in leadership, they're very likable. You want to talk to them again, but it's so kind of nebulous how it's talked about that it's hard to translate into action for others.
Sure.
Man, did he just hit this sweet spot in the middle for me?
Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. And I think a lot of it comes down to what caught my attention early in our conversation is I did this research project and came up with these shortcuts.
Yes.
And we actually didn't get to the shortcuts until later in the conversation. We were really talking more about just conceptually a lot of things about emotional intelligence and the competency war that people go through when they're in a role that they were the expert and now they're the leader or the coach and all these different concepts. You and I both had our attention really raised when he started talking about executive level problems. I had never heard that term before, but it's really true. You know, if you're a leader, are you dealing with the problems at the top level, that's 12-month plus level, or are you dealing with this week problem in your business? And that's a really good gauge too, Rich. If you're listening to this conversation, you're an entrepreneur, are you dealing with problems you have this week or next week? Or are you dealing with problems you need in 6 or 12 months? If the former, you may need to reevaluate who's on your team and do you have the right goals in place? Are you doing the right jobs as a leader? And if you're focused on the more longer term, 6, 12 months plus, you're probably in the right spot of dealing with executive level problems.
And I really liked your take on the 5 whys. What I thought of when you were talking about that was on the first why, isn't the answer going to be how?
Yes.
Like, why did that happen? Why did this problem come up? And it's the mechanical how things went about. And you get like 2 or 3 more whys into it, and you're going to talk about the what.
Yeah.
And you get another 2 or 3, and you're at 4 or 5 whys. Now you're talking about the why. Like, it was just, that was what I thought of is you bringing the 5 whys into it kind of works from bottom up. And that's why the 5 whys are as powerful as they are, because they get to the core. They get to the executive level problem by the time you get to the 5th why.
Yeah. And this kind of goes back to why some of the best coaches just ask very simple questions. Like the 1-word question, why? And the coachee responds and they say, well, why is that? And by the end of the 4th or 5th why, the coach E is like, oh, okay, I see what the problem is here. Now you can ask yourself those 5 whys, but he pointed out very easily too that when you're dealing with these situations, it's a lot easier for somebody from out of town to witness a situation and point it out to you. It's very hard to be that introspective and that self-aware of the problems because you're in the middle of it. You're in the middle of your business. I mean, being a founder or an entrepreneur or a CEO, it's not an easy job. And you care so much about your business. You care so much about your people. You care so much about your customers. You want to always do a good job. You never want to fail. You never want to make a mistake. So you're always trying to plug that hole of the how and the what.
It's funny that comes back to the conversation with Mike K.
Yeah.
On bringing your coach online and your player online, because you're right. I mean, what you just articulated was essentially some of that podcast, right? It was like it's hard to coach yourself in some of those moments.
Yeah.
You know that I like clear and concise and memorable like definitions of things that can be complex. And you know that the one that I have heard that I love on strategy is the scarce allocation of resources.
Yep.
We got one from Merritt Khan that was on emotional intelligence, and it was how aware are you of your emotions and how they impact others.
Yep.
I got one from Scott here on leadership, because I've always looked at leadership as the answer to what is leadership is people are following. But Scott had a different twist on it that I really liked. And he talked about leadership as a choice. And what I wrote down was There's a difference between leadership and intentional leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership is flat out people are following, because if nobody's following, you're not leading, period. It doesn't matter what your role is. And
Correct.
you could be at a lower level leader role and a whole bunch of people follow. Well, you're a big time leader because people are following. So like that is at its core of simplicity and can be useful in situations. But when we talk about intentional leadership,
Yep.
he said, working through others to get things done. Very simple. What is it to lead? People follow. What is it to intentionally lead? Working through others to get things done. And
Yeah.
that's going to be one of the things that sticks with me, just like Merrick Khan's answer to emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And just to take it a step further, it's intentionally accomplishing these goals. And if you have alignment to the vocabulary of these goals with your team of achieving results, having enthusiastic customers, building an engaged team, building more leaders, that's what they want. One of the big things, though, Rich, that I loved your challenge question at the end. By the way, very tough question that you put Scott on the spot to answer. Is if you could talk to every leader in the world, what would you say?
And by the way, he nailed it.
He did, and his response just has me thinking. Right, like the companies that our parents used to work for are kind of a thing of the past, right? You work for a company 40 years, get your pension and your gold watch, and that's your career. Even when we grew up, you go to corporate America, you learn the ropes, you kind of go out there and be an entrepreneur, you prove yourself, right? Those kinds of things. We're dealing with a whole different workforce right now, totally different workforce, right? Scattered across the globe. They want different things. And when he talked about build your business around and for your team, that's a big thing, because a lot of entrepreneurs build their businesses for them, for their family, for their wealth creation, for their independence, and they use employees to help them achieve that goal. But I do really think that there is a big momentum shift going on right now in the world, not just because of the current situation. I think it's going to last for a very, very long time, where people don't want to just work for a paycheck. They just don't want to do that anymore. So if as an entrepreneur, you can build a team and a business that the purpose of the business is around the team and for the team, and they're a part of it, and they're intrinsically motivated around what they're doing every day because of it. Now you can build leaders within that team. But if you have this carousel where people are coming in and like, this business doesn't really care about me, I'm just a number and a paycheck, you're going to have that rat race of just trying to build your leadership team. And if you never build your leadership team, you're going to be the person doing the work, and you're never going to be able to accomplish either the job or the results that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, as you were talking about that, it reminded me of a conversation I just had 2 days ago with our 18-year-old who is in the Navy, Kaylin. And she had said to me, I'm not all that passionate about calibration of tools, which is what she is in C school to be trained to do. And she said that as though that was like a huge problem. And she's 18 years old, and
Sure.
she's starting to get into something she's not that passionate about. So I took the opportunity to have a mentoring moment, and I said to her pretty much what you just said. I said, you do realize what a good job was defined as back in the day was you had regular work, steady income, and benefits.
Yep.
And it didn't matter what you did. That was a good job. You could be sweeping floors, you could be working on computers. I mean, it was a good job if you had those three things. If you're not passionate about what you do, and the reason I tell this story is I'm also speaking to our entrepreneur listeners.
Yep.
If you're not passionate about what you do right now, that may not be a problem in and of itself. That's not a problem if you're not passionate about it. You do ultimately want to find something you are passionate about, but the fact that you're not passionate about it today doesn't mean don't do it, cease activity, find something you're passionate about, and then take a step forward. It's like,
Sure.
That's good you recognized you're not passionate about it. You may be, the deeper you go into it, you may surprise yourself. But that doesn't mean stop doing what you're doing just because you're not passionate about it. Keep moving forward, and you ultimately will discover something that you are passionate about.
Yep, absolutely, Rich. And I think at the end of this, it's not just you, the entrepreneur. Your team may feel the same way. And we talked about this on one of our conversations where a lot of people are doing stay interviews right now. And what you may find when you're sitting down with current team members is they're just not fully passionate about your widget making business. And you're sitting down with an employee, you're trying to retain them in your business, but it may not be the what you do, it may be the why you're doing it. You may not love making candles, but on the news the other week, I was watching a candle company that's making Ukraine candles and giving donations to Ukraine. And it's not the candle making they're passionate about. It's about helping others that they're passionate about. And so it's very important as leaders that it's not the what you do as a business, but if you can build your business around and for those people and get them intrinsically motivated, maybe even not what you're doing, but how you're doing it or why you're doing it, you can really keep a workforce there forever. But not only that, make them a part of it and make them feel accomplished through what they're doing.
And the why you're doing it that you're speaking to there, that's the indicator of an executive level problem.